January 1842, Powell asked Marx why he hadn't yet written for the Rheinische Zeitung. In March, urged by young Marx, shifted his primary focus from Ruge's journal to the Rheinische Zeitung. While the Berlin young Hegelians were still engaged in their word games, Marx began critiquing the records of the previous year's Rhine Provincial Assembly debates because they involved real politics, the philosophy of law class struggle, and the essence of Russia. To appease state debt holders, Friedrich Wilhelm IV reconvened the Estates Assembly in 1841 after a years-long hiatus, as his 1820 promise required provincial assembly approval for new state loans. Assembly members needed to own land to ensure conservatism. Typically, half the provincial delegates were noble landowners, a third were townspeople who had owned land for over 10 years, and a sixth were peasants. Even in the newly acquired, more progressive Rhine province, nobles constituted over a third. Resolutions required a 2/3 majority to pass guaranteeing noble interests. Cologne citizens presented the Provincial Assembly with a petition signed by over 1,000 people, demanding public access to assembly sessions, the daily publication of full proceedings, free discussion of the Assembly's debates, and general provincial political matters in the press, and a press law to replace the censorship system. The Assembly forwarded the petition to the king with major omissions. The king refused it. The Prussian government restricted the Rhine Provincial Assembly, forbidding discussion of disputes between the government and the Archbishop of Cologne or constitutional issues. The Rhine Assembly proved ineffective, even rejecting, by a 2/3 majority, a proposal widely supported by both liberals and the religious to bring the illegally arrested archbishop to trial or return him to his diocese. The assembly only became active when landowner interests were involved, debating issues like division of landed estates, the forest theft law, and game poaching laws. Legislative power clearly served the private interests of large landowners. Regarding the Provincial Assembly, Marx argued that Prussia's reactionary policies were not contradictory to the essence of the Prussian state, as the young Hegelians believed. Rather, they perfectly aligned with it, and fundamentally could not align with the people's wishes. The Rhine Assembly, like other provincial assemblies, was a reactionary body, dominated by landowners, serving to defend their privileges. He planned 5 articles on these debates: on press freedom, the Cologne Archbishop affair, the forest theft law, game poaching, and division of estates. Only the pieces on press freedom and forest theft were published. The second article on the Prussian government's conflict with the Archbishop was blocked by the censors, and the last 2 were never written. In April, writing debates on freedom of the press and publication of the proceedings of the Assembly of the Estates. His focus was not solely press freedom itself, but the crucial underlying issues: class, constitutional government, the Assembly, the philosophy of law, people's freedom and revolution. Class analysis was the central theme. The article displayed his mastery as Germany's foremost philosopher of the time, wielding Kantian rationalism, Hegelian dialectics, and objective idealism, and, most valuably, his nascent, not yet fully formed materialist philosophy of law. He wrote that in the assembly, it was not individuals but classes debating. Representatives of the upper classes defended class interests. That was the whole truth. The princely estate demanded the press revolve around high society and individuals, not the nation. The knightly estate wanted assembly records kept secret, even though the king had permitted publication, without naming speakers for appearance's sake. The urban estate representatives understood press freedom as guild freedom. Marx concluded this transformed provincial rights into privileges for the provincial assembly, its deputies illegally harming the province's interests. Due to their particular estate biases, some deputies wanted privileges solely for the government, others wished to distribute them to individuals. They wavered between deliberately stubborn privilege and a naturally weak, inconsistent liberalism. Only the peasant estate clearly stated, censorship is outdated. Where it still exists, it is viewed as a hated constraint prohibiting writing about publicly discussed matters. A free press is the wise eye and mirror of the people's spirit, the spirit of the state, a world of ideas flowing from the real world, and becoming increasingly rich in spirit, breathing new life back into reality. Law is the positive, clear, universal norm in which freedom attains an impersonal theoretical existence, independent of any individual's arbitrary will. A code of laws is the Bible of the people's freedom. The law must express the inherent laws governing people's actions, the conscious reflection of human life. Law only becomes true law when the unconscious natural laws of freedom are transformed into conscious state laws. Marx's views on the state and law were still rationalist and liberal. However, the objectivity he maintained within his philosophy of law, grounded in Hegelian philosophy, starkly contrasted with the trend towards subjective idealism, individualism, and liberalism taken by Bauer and other young Hegelians. For instance, Marx believed revolutionary ideas in the press were the product of national revolutions, not the cause of revolutions or mere press agitation. He wrote, France's turmoil was unrelated to its press freedom. Press freedom doesn't cause shifting conditions any more than an astronomer's telescope causes cosmic motion. The Belgian Revolution was the product of the Belgian spirit. Consequently, the press, the freest current expression of spirit, participated in the Belgian Revolution. If the Belgian press had stood outside the revolution, it wouldn't have been truly Belgian. Similarly, if the Belgian Revolution hadn't also been a revolution of the press, it wouldn't have been truly Belgian. A people's revolution is total, meaning every sphere rebels in its own way. This interpretation still followed Hegel's Volksgeist concept, but was also moving closer to historical materialism. His Bonn notes from this period also record his study of the historical views of the French materialists and his planned critique of Hegel's philosophy of law, as he wrote to Rouge, shared the same principles as Feuerbach's materialism. Moving step by step towards materialism in history and the philosophy of law was Marx's fundamental transformation. During 1842 to 1843, he wrote that authors producing works as material means were driven by internal unfreedom. Writing about the French press, he noted it avoided spiritual censorship, but faced material checks, like high financial deposits for security. This internal unfreedom wasn't elaborated upon here, but foreshadowed core concepts of his later historical materialism, class analysis, capital, and labor alienation. Marx stated, the work is an end in itself. It is not at all a means, either for the author himself or for others. When necessary, therefore, the author can sacrifice his very existence for the work's existence. This echoed his enduring Promethean spirit. On press freedom, he wrote, opposing press freedom means on the one hand flatly denying universal reason and universal freedom, insisting humanity is perpetually immature. On the other, it absolutely affirms the government and officials' freedom, reason, and maturity. This is sophistry. Its essence is privilege. Press censorship laws are not laws, but poor police tactics. The government hears only its own voice. It knows it hears only itself, yet it indulges the illusion that it hears the people's voice, and demands the people indulge in the same illusion. Consequently, part of the people sinks into political superstition, another part into political distrust, or completely withdraws from state life, becoming a crowd of narrow-minded individuals concerned only with themselves. Thus, the nation's morals are corrupted. In countries with press censorship, all secrets become alluring. Every banned work, good or bad, becomes extraordinary. The people are compelled to view free-thinking works as illegal. Thus, they become accustomed to seeing the illegal as freedom, freedom as illegality, and the legal as unfreedom. This is how the spirit of the state is strangled. In February, Marx, former law professor at Berlin University, Friedrich Karl von Savigny, representing the historical school of law, was appointed justice minister by Friedrich Wilhelm IV, who hoped the school would help consolidate his rule against progress. In April, Marx wrote the Philosophical Manifesto of the Historical School of Law, published in the Rheinische Stung in August. This was the latest chapter in a decades-long German philosophy of law battle between two schools, the historical school, represented by Hugo Savigny, etc., versus the rationalist school, represented by Theobald Hegel and the young Hegelians. Marx, as a university student, had witnessed the disputes between his professors Savigny and Eduard Ganz. Marx targeted the founder of the historical school, Gustav Hugo, in his article. Hugo claimed to be Kant's pupil but betrayed him. Kant held the thing in itself was unknowable, yet he remained a rationalist. Hugo, however, twisted this into crude skepticism and empiricism. Researching the roots of law and its philosophy was unnecessary. He denied the reality of reason, yet defended unreason, because it was positive and existing, arguing that historical existence was key proof for legal validity with custom as the true source of law. This effectively justified despotism and violence. For example, Hugo found slavery rational. Unfreedom alters neither the animal nor rational nature of the unfree compared to others. Slavery is feasible, not only physically, but also rationally. Of course, slavery is not absolutely lawful. It is a temporary law. Slaves belonging to the rich clearly have more security against want than the poor, and the rich care about their suffering. Even if slaves are abused or maimed, their suffering isn't necessarily worse than the poor endure. Slaves are spared military service. Among Circassian women, slaves, beauties are easier to find than among women beggars. As for rational nature, to be a slave is preferable to enduring poverty. Regarding constitutional law, Hugo said obedience to the authorities in power is a sacred moral duty. And as for the distribution of governmental power, no state system is absolutely lawful. Yet, however power is distributed, every system is temporarily lawful. Marx commented that this was the dirty obsolete fancy of the old regimes, pseudo-enlightened thinkers, dissolute platitudes. According to Hugo, let nations legislate according to their customs, it makes no difference, all are irrational. So, submit to whatever is actual in your own little world. Even if Germans cherished their daughters, while Rajputs killed baby girls. And Hugo didn't truly deny reason. The reason and sole legal characteristic he acknowledged in man was animal nature. Hence, he criticized marriage, arguing that restraining sexual desire violated human animal and rational nature. Marx wrote that the historical school was the product of 18th century frivolity. These excerpts were sufficient to judge whether Hugo's successors could bear the responsibility of being contemporary lawgivers. In April, Marx moved to Cologne. He said, I simply couldn't bear to be so close to the professors in Bonn any longer. Who wants to constantly deal with those spiritual skunks? Jenny wrote to him, little bore. How happy I am that you are happy, that my letter lifted you up, that you think of me, that you live in a room with wallpaper, that you drank champagne in Cologne, that there's a Hegelian club there, that you dreamed, in short, because you are my dear one, my little bore. Though Jenny advised him not to get tangled up in politics, the most dangerous activity, Marx was becoming the intellectual pillar of the city's liberal movement. However, in a letter to Rouge on April 27, he wrote, I have abandoned the idea of moving to Cologne because life there is too noisy, And though there are many friends, it doesn't foster philosophical perfection. He planned to send Rouge 4 articles on religious art, Romanticism, the philosophical manifesto of the historical school, and positive philosophers. These 4, he explained, were interconnected, jointly critiquing the Christian state's ideological foundations. Christianity, Romanticism, the historical school, and positive philosophy. But he kept sending Rouge apologies, not articles. The reason for the delay was his increasing shift away from philosophical and religious struggles towards direct political engagement. From about mid-April, his collaboration with the Rheinische Gazette intensified. Marx returned to Bonn. Bauer wrote, "Marx is back here, and we recently went out together into the wide countryside, enjoying all the beautiful scenery once again. The trip was splendid, and we were as cheerful as ever. At Godesberg, we rented 2 donkeys, and riding them, madly rode around the hills through the villages. Bonn society looked at us with the usual amazement. We cheered the donkeys brayed." Bauer left Bonn for Berlin on May 4th to appeal his dismissal. Marx abandoned seeking an academic post, entirely dedicating himself fully to journalism. Marx said, "It would be a pity if no one remained here to annoy the saintly gentleman." In both his critique of the Provincial Assembly and the historical school, Marx fired directly at the threatening forces of reaction, unlike other intellectuals or the Berlin Free Group, who merely scratched at religion. Marx still hoped Bauer, upon returning to Berlin, might reform the Free Group, transforming it from vapidness to practical engagement, unaware that he and Bauer were now irreversibly parting ways. Marx turned left, Bauer turned right.